In a damp Wednesday morning in March 2007, in the peat fields of Oakhaven, Scotland, a $420,000 Ethelred 1050 Vario, the crown jewel of German engineering, plunged its nose into a waterlogged peat pocket hidden beneath a deceptive layer of emerald grass, sinking nearly 5 feet into the black muck before the operator could even scream. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unearned confidence. Sterling, a man whose suit cost more than a year of local property taxes, stood on the edge of the field. He was the senior technical representative for Titan Forge, and today was supposed to be his masterpiece. He had a film crew, 3 high-definition cameras, and a script that promised to show the world how technology had finally conquered nature. He didn't look at the sky. He didn't look at the way the grass rippled like a dark sea. He only looked at the lens of the primary camera. He wanted the shot. He wanted the glory. He wanted the views on a platform that was still in its infancy, a digital stage for an ego that knew no bounds. Behind the fence, 79-year-old Alistair McCrimmon leaned against a weathered post. His hands were mapped with the scars of 60 winters. Beside him sat Bones, a border collie whose muzzle had turned white years ago. Bones didn't bark. He watched. He knew the Blackwater Valley better than the men with the satellite maps. He smelled the rot beneath the green. He felt the vibration of the heavy machinery, a rhythmic, thumping intrusion into the silence of the Highlands. Alistair adjusted his flat cap. He took a slow sip of tea from a dented tin mug. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The land was already speaking, but Sterling wasn't listening. The Ethelred 1050 rolled off the low-loader. It was a beast of steel and glass, draped in a coat of metallic green paint that shone like a beetle's back. It had 500 horsepower. It had a Vario transmission that promised infinite gear ratios. It had a cabin that looked like the cockpit of a fighter jet. To Sterling it was a god. To the peat it was just 14 tons of dead weight looking for a place to rest. Sterling signaled the cameraman. He stepped forward, smoothing his tie, and began his monologue. He spoke of torque. He spoke of software. He spoke of the total dominance of Titan Forge. He ignored the way Bones growled low in his throat. He ignored the way the ground groaned under the tires. He was a man of the future, and in his mind, the past was already buried. "Roll it!" Sterling commanded. The engine roared. It wasn't the sound of a machine working. It was the sound of a machine screaming its own importance. The operator engaged the drive. The massive tires, taller than a man, began to churn the soft soil. For the first 20 yards, it looked like a triumph. The cameras captured the spray of dirt. The microphones caught the whistle of the turbocharger. Sterling smiled. It was a practiced, hollow smile. He looked over at Alistair and Bones. He saw a relic and a mutt. He saw a world that was dying, being replaced by the gleaming monster he represented. He felt a surge of superiority. It was the kind of feeling that usually precedes a disaster. Bones stood up. He walked to the fence line, his tail stiff. He let out a sharp, urgent bark, staring directly at a patch of grass 30 feet ahead of the machine. It looked the same as any other patch, but the light hit it differently. It was a devil's breath, a pocket where the peat had turned to liquid soup under a thin crust of vegetation. Sterling turned, his face reddening. He picked up a plastic bucket near the gear and threw it toward the fence. It missed, but the gesture was clear. "Shut that animal up," he yelled. "You're ruining the audio. Get him out of here!" Alistair didn't move. He didn't blink. He reached down and placed a hand on Bones's head. The dog went silent instantly. Alistair looked at Sterling. He didn't see a high-powered executive. He saw a boy playing with a toy he didn't understand. "The ground don't care about your audio, son," Alistair said. The voice was quiet. It was the sound of a stone sliding over ice. Sterling scoffed. He turned back to the camera, dismissing the old man as a senile nuisance. He gave the operator a thumbs up. "Push it! I want more spray. Give me the power." The operator obeyed. He floored the throttle. The Ethelred lunged forward. Its tires bit deep. Then the world gave way. There was no crack, no warning, just a sickening wet thud. The front end of the machine didn't just dip, it vanished. The devil's breath opened its mouth and swallowed the $420,000 investment whole. The nose of the tractor dived, the weight of the massive engine driving it down into the black abyss. Within seconds, the front grille was gone. The headlights were buried. The peat climbed up over the hood, thick and cold, sealing the fate of the conqueror. Inside the cabin, the intelligence of the Ethelred 1050 became its own worst enemy. The electronic control unit, or ECU, sensed the loss of traction. Its algorithms were designed for efficiency, for peak performance on clay, silt, and sand. But it had no programming for the soul-crushing grip of a Scottish peat bog. The Vario transmission, reacting to the wheel slip at the front, didn't stop. It calculated. It decided that more power was the solution. It shifted the torque, pushing the massive rear tires to drive the front end even deeper into the liquid darkness. The machine was literally digging its own grave. The operator panicked. His fingers danced over the touch screens, but the haptic feedback felt like a joke against the raw power of the muck. He tried to engage the diff lock. He tried the manual override. Nothing mattered. The more the sensors tried to save the tractor, the faster the peat rose. By the time the operator finally slammed the emergency stop, the nose was buried 1.4 meters deep. The radiator was packed with black sludge. The cooling fans had shattered against the resistance of the earth. The $420,000 miracle was now a $420,000 anchor. Silence returned to the valley, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Sterling stood at the edge of the pit, his breathing ragged. He wasn't looking at the machine, he was looking at the camera. He saw his career sinking along with the tractor. He turned to the film crew, his voice a frantic hiss. "Cut the feed! Turn it off! Now!" He then grabbed his phone. His hands shook as he dialed. Alistair didn't move from his post. He watched Sterling's breakdown with the detached interest of a man watching a storm pass over a distant mountain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small whetstone. He began to sharpen a pocket knife, the rhythmic shh of the stone against steel acting as a counterpoint to Sterling's hysterical yelling into the phone. Bones sat by his side, his eyes never leaving the sunken tractor. The dog knew the fight wasn't over. The land wasn't finished with the intruder yet. 2 hours crawled by. The March sun offered no warmth, only a flat gray light that made the black mud look like obsidian. A massive recovery truck from the Titan Forge dealership arrived, its air brakes hissing a warning. They brought out heavy-duty steel cables, 30 millimeters of braided defiance. They brought out a second tractor, a slightly smaller model, to act as an anchor. "Mock it up to the rear hitch," Sterling barked. He was trying to regain his authority, but his voice lacked the steel it had held that morning. He looked at the mud-caked boots of the recovery crew and felt a surge of disgust. He wanted to be back in the glass-walled office in the city. He wanted to be anywhere but here, in the shadow of an old man and a silent dog. They hooked the first cable to the Ethelred's rear towing point. The recovery truck's winch began to hum. The cable went taut, rising out of the muck like a glistening snake. It vibrated with a low humming frequency that made the teeth ache. Snap! The sound was like a rifle shot echoing off the hills. The steel cable didn't just break. It disintegrated. The loose end whipped back through the air, narrowly missing the cameraman and shattering the side mirror of the recovery truck. "Again!" Sterling screamed, his face a mask of desperation. "Double the lines! Use the snatch blocks!" They rigged a second attempt. This time they used 2 cables and a pulley system to double the mechanical advantage. The recovery truck's engine groaned, black smoke pouring from its stack. The sunken Ethelred shifted a fraction of an inch. A tiny bubble of air escaped the mud near the front tire. Then came the sound of rending metal. It wasn't a snap this time, it was a groan. The entire rear hitch assembly, a massive casting of reinforced iron designed to pull tens of tons, was torn clean off the frame of the Ethelred. Bolts the size of a man's thumb sheared off like they were made of plastic. The cables went limp. The tractor settled back into its hole, deeper now, the suction of the peat reclaiming its prize. Sterling fell to his knees. He looked at the mangled hitch lying in the dirt. He looked at the broken cables. The future had failed. The math had been wrong. The technology was useless against the weight of the earth. Alistair closed his pocket knife with a soft click. He stepped away from the fence and walked toward the gate. Bones followed, his tail wagging once, a short, sharp motion of anticipation. Alistair opened the gate. It creaked on its hinges, a sound of wood on iron that seemed louder than the recovery truck's engine. He walked toward the edge of the pit. He didn't look at the recovery crew. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the mud. He studied the way the water pooled in the tracks. He looked at the angle of the sunken nose. Then he looked at Sterling. "You want me to try?" Alistair asked. Sterling looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Alistair's worn tweed jacket, his calloused hands, and his muddy boots. Then he looked past him to the small shed behind the farmhouse, where a sliver of gray metal was visible under a tattered tarp. "You?" Sterling spat, a pathetic attempt at a laugh bubbling in his throat. "With what? That pile of rust you call a tractor? The thing belongs in a scrapyard, not a recovery site. Look at this. This is a 1050. It's 14 tons of the most advanced machinery on the planet. My cables snapped like thread. My hitch tore like paper. What are you going to do, old man? Pray it out?" Alistair didn't flinch. He didn't even look insulted. He just looked at the Ethelred. "The cables didn't fail because they were weak," he said softly. "They failed because you were pulling against the world. You don't fight the peat, son. You negotiate with it." Sterling stared at him. He was a man who lived by spreadsheets and power-to-weight ratios. He didn't understand negotiation with dirt. But he looked at the sun, which was beginning to dip toward the horizon. He looked at the ruined tractor. If he went back to the office empty-handed, he was finished. "How much?" Sterling asked, his voice low. Alistair shook his head. "I don't want your money." "Then what?" Alistair pointed to the camera. "You give me the footage. Everything. The sink. The break. The failure. All of it." Sterling hesitated. That footage was evidence of a disaster, but if the tractor stayed in the hole, the disaster was permanent. "Fine," he hissed. "If you can get it out, the footage is yours." "But you won't. You'll just break your back and waste my time." Alistair nodded. He turned to Bones. "Go on, lad. Find the hard point." The dog darted forward. He didn't go to the rear of the tractor. He went to the front, circling the mud pit until he found a small rise of heather-covered earth about 50 feet ahead of the sunken nose. He sat down and barked once. Alistair turned back toward his shed. "I'll be back. Keep your cameras rolling. You might want to see how it's done." Alistair walked to the weathered shed. The wood groaned as he pulled the heavy doors wide. Inside, the air smelled of 70 years of cold grease, diesel soot, and stagnant time. In the center of the darkness sat the Iron Oak Series 3. It was a 1947 model, a relic of a time when machines were built to survive wars, not just seasons. It was a squat, orange-rusted block of iron with 4 wheels. No cabin. No glass. No computers. Just a 6-liter, single-cylinder, horizontal engine. It was 2.8 tons of stubbornness. Alistair reached for a small tin box on the workbench. He pulled out a brass cartridge. It looked like a shotgun shell, but contained no lead, only a charge of black powder. This was the shotgun start, a ritual from an era before electric starters and glowing screens. Sterling watched from the edge of the pit as Alistair drove the Iron Oak toward the fence. The engine wasn't running yet. Alistair was coasting it down the slight incline of his yard. When he reached the gate, he stopped. "What is that?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with exhausted sarcasm. "A museum exhibit? You're going to tow a 1050 with a lawn ornament?" Alistair didn't look at him. He climbed off the metal seat. He moved with a deliberate slowness that made Sterling's frantic energy seem childish. Alistair opened the breech block on the side of the engine. He slid the brass cartridge in. He snapped the block shut. He picked up a heavy iron bar and inserted it into the flywheel. He leaned his entire weight against it, turning the massive wheel until it hit the compression point. "That thing weighs nothing," Sterling mocked, gesturing at the Iron Oak. "It'll just spin its wheels." Alistair looked up, his eyes cold under the brim of his cap. "It weighs enough," Alistair said. "And more importantly, it weighs less than your pride." Alistair picked up a small hammer. He tapped the firing pin on the breech. Boom! A cloud of acrid gray smoke erupted from the vertical exhaust stack. The entire tractor bucked as the explosion forced the massive piston forward. The flywheel began to spin, slowly at first, then with a steady rhythmic thrum. Thump, thump, thump. The sound wasn't a roar. It was a pulse. It was the heartbeat of the earth itself. The iron oak didn't vibrate, it throbbed. The air around it seemed to thicken with the smell of unrefined diesel and history. Alistair climbed back into the seat. He didn't use a throttle lever. He used his ears. He listened to the rhythm of the cylinder. He drove the iron oak through the gate and onto the field. He didn't go toward the rear of the sunken Ethelred. He drove past it. He circled around to the front, positioning himself exactly where Bones was sitting on the heather-covered mound. "What are you doing?" Sterling yelled. "You're pulling it forward? You'll bury it deeper." Alistair ignored him. He reached into the back of his tractor and pulled out a length of thick, blackened chain. These weren't the shiny steel cables from the recovery truck. This was hand-forged iron, each link as thick as a man's wrist. He walked into the mud, his boots sinking 6 inches with every step. He didn't look at the muck. He didn't care about his clothes. He didn't hook the chain to the axle. He climbed onto the hood of the sunken Ethelred, standing right above the buried radiator. He wrapped the chain around the highest point of the front safety frame, the ROPS bar designed to protect the cabin in a rollover. He walked back to his iron oak and hooked the other end to the heavy drawbar. The chain now ran from the front of the iron oak up to the top of the Ethelred at a 45-degree angle. "You're going to rip the cab off." Sterling screamed, stepping toward him. "Stop! That's 250,000 pounds of glass and electronics." Alistair turned his head. His gaze was like a physical weight. Sterling stopped in his tracks. "I'm not pulling it out," Alistair said. "I'm lifting it up. Your cables failed because you tried to drag a mountain through a wall. The peat has a vacuum. It's holding the nose like a giant's hand. If you don't break the seal, you can pull with 1,000 horses, and all you'll get is broken chain." Alistair sat back down. He put his hand on the gear lever. He didn't look at the Ethelred. He looked at the horizon. He engaged the clutch. The iron oak didn't scream. It didn't spin its wheels. The engine note didn't even change. It just deepened. Thump, thump, thump. The chain went taut. It began to hum, a low, terrifying sound of metal under extreme tension. The iron oak's front wheels lifted 3 inches off the ground. Alistair didn't move. He kept his foot steady. He wasn't using speed. He was using torque, the raw, low RPM torque of a 6-liter single cylinder. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. Nothing happened. The Ethelred remained frozen in its black tomb. "See?" Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "It's useless. You're just sitting there." Alistair didn't blink. He knew the peat. He knew it was a game of patience. He was applying a constant upward pressure. He was waiting for the earth to exhale. At the 5-minute mark, a sound came from the mud. It was a wet, sucking noise. Slurp. A single bubble of air escaped from beneath the Ethelred's front tire. Alistair felt it through the seat of his pants. He nudged the throttle just a fraction. "Look," the cameraman whispered, pointing his lens. The nose of the Ethelred, the massive 14-ton beast, shifted. It didn't move forward. It moved up. The 45-degree angle was working. Alistair was peeling the tractor out of the mud like a scab off a wound. 10 minutes in, the top of the radiator appeared. The black muck rolled off the green paint in thick, heavy slabs. The iron oak continued its relentless pulse. It didn't overheat. It didn't throw a code. It didn't have a sensor to tell it that the load was too heavy. It just kept turning the flywheel. 15 minutes. The front tires of the Ethelred were visible. They were coated in a layer of peat so thick they looked like giant rolls of black licorice. The suction was broken. The vacuum was gone. "It's coming," Sterling breathed, his mouth hanging open. He had forgotten his suit, his career, and his pride. He was watching a miracle of physics. At the 18-minute mark, Alistair shifted into a slightly higher gear. The iron oak gave one final violent throb. With a sound like a giant gasping for air, the Ethelred 1050 slid out of the hole. It rolled onto the hard heather, its nose dripping with the remains of the Blackwater Valley. Alistair didn't stop until the Ethelred was 20 feet away from the pit. He depressed the clutch and brought the iron oak to a halt. He didn't jump for joy. He didn't pump his fist. He simply reached over and cut the fuel. The engine gave one last heavy thump and went silent. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the tink, tink, tink of the cooling metal and the heavy breathing of the men who had just witnessed the impossible. Alistair climbed down. He walked to the Ethelred and unhooked his chain. Sterling approached him. He looked at the Ethelred, then at the Iron Oak, then at Alistair. For the first time that day, he looked like a human being instead of a marketing brochure. "How?" Sterling asked. "It's impossible. The math doesn't work. 2 tons pulling 14? It's not supposed to happen." Alistair wiped his hands on a greasy rag. "The math works fine, son. You just forgot to account for the soul of the machine. Your tractor is a servant to a computer. Mine is a partner to the man." Sterling reached into his jacket. He pulled out a checkbook. "I told you I'd pay." "How much?" Alistair looked at the checkbook, then at the camera crew. "I told you. I don't want your money. I want the footage." Sterling hesitated. "Listen, about that, my bosses, they aren't going to be happy if this gets out. It makes the 1050 look bad. What if I give you £5,000? Then just hand over the dog's collar and let's call it a day." Alistair's face went hard. The kindness of the recovery was gone, replaced by the granite of the Highlands. He took a step towards Sterling. Bones moved with him, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "A deal is a deal," Alistair said. The voice was like a closing coffin lid. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Highlands, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley. Sterling stood paralyzed, his hand still hovering over his checkbook. He looked at Alistair, then at the small, mud-caked camera strapped to Bones' collar. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The failure wasn't just a private embarrassment anymore. It was data. It was a digital ghost that would haunt the servers of Titan Forge forever. "That camera," Sterling whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. "It's consumer grade. It's a toy. It can't possibly have captured the technical nuances, the soil composition, the sensor malfunction." Alistair didn't look at the camera. He looked at the horizon. "It captured the truth, son. It captured a man who thought he could buy the Earth, and it captured the Earth's response. It captured you throwing a bucket at an old dog because he knew more than your computer. That's the only nuance people are going to care about." Sterling's bravado finally disintegrated. He slumped against the mud-spattered door of his SUV. "What do you want? If it's not the money, what is it? You want me to lose my job? You want to ruin a company that employs thousands?" Alistair began to walk toward his farmhouse, his boots clicking rhythmically on the stones. Bones trotted beside him, the GoPro blinking its small red eye one last time before Alistair reached down and switched it off. "I don't care about your company," Alistair said without looking back. "And I don't care about your job. I care about the fence you broke. I care about the silence you ruined. But mostly, I care about the fact that you think a piece of paper with numbers on it makes you bigger than the man standing in front of you. Go home, Sterling. Take your broken god and get off my land. The footage stays with me. If I ever see a Titan Forge truck on this side of the valley again, the world gets to watch you crawl." Sterling didn't move. He watched the old man and the dog disappear into the shadows of the stone barn. He looked at the Ethelred 1050, his 14-ton masterpiece, now sitting useless and cold in the dirt, its rear hitch torn away like a discarded toy. The future felt very small and very fragile in the face of the ancient Scottish knight. Inside the farmhouse, Alistair didn't call the newspapers. He didn't upload the video to a viral site. He simply removed the SD card and placed it in an old cigar box on the mantel next to his grandfather's watch and a handful of dried heather. He didn't need the world to see Sterling's shame. He only needed the leverage to keep his valley quiet. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey. He sat in his high-backed chair, listening to the wind whistle through the eaves. Bones curled up at his feet, sighing in his sleep. Outside, the sounds of the recovery trucks slowly faded as the Titan Forge team retreated in the dark, defeated by a machine that didn't have a single line of code in its iron soul. In a world obsessed with the next update and the latest model, we often forget that character isn't something you can download. It's built link by link through years of sweat and silence. Alistair McCrimmon didn't win because he had a better machine. He won because he had a better foundation. If this story reminded you that the old ways still hold a weight that gold can't buy, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to join our circle of those who respect the steel and the soil. Until next time, keep your head clear, your boots muddy, and your word iron.